Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news agenda. I'm joined, as usual, I'm pleased to say, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our senior fellow historian and world commentator, and indeed also by Amy Gallagher, who is the woman behind Stand Up to Woke and campaigner. Good to see you again.
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about basically two issues this week. First of all, starting with obviously GB News, which has been in the news, a news channel becoming the story over the past week, ever since the Laurence Fox incident on that. What actually does this really mean for the channel? Have they handled it the wrong way? And does it have a future? We're going to be talking about that. And also, this week, we've seen the Tory party conference. When you see the clips of it, they certainly seem to be having a very, very good time themselves. But what does it amount to for you and me and everyone else, for that matter? So I want to start with GB News. We've all been on GB News. You're on a lot, Rafe. I'm on a lot, and you've been on as well, haven't you, Amy? What do you think is going to come out of this? I mean, from what I can understand, they are essentially in kind of ongoing crisis talks. That's how it appears to be the case.
I mean, I think we need to remember why GB News was set up. It was set up because conversation in the media landscape and the cultural landscape more broadly was becoming narrower and narrower, and anything outside of that was seen as beyond the pale and not allowed. And the terms like racist and sexist and transphobic were becoming used more broadly in regards to everything as a way of shutting down communication about things like grooming gangs, immigration, puberty blockers for children. Anything and everything was being shut down. So that's why GB News was set up as a way of allowing those kind of conversations to happen. What happened with Laurence Fox was that he was talking about this female commentator in a very crass, crude way, talking about, I won't repeat it here, I think many people know, but talking about how attractive or unattractive she was. And I mean, I think he was trying to make a broader point about radical feminists, that men don't find radical feminists very attractive, and that it would be off-putting to be in a relationship with someone like that. But he said it in a very, laddish way, which wasn't great. Now, is it misogynist or sexist what he said? I think it's debatable. I mean, I hear a lot of things said that I consider to be misogynist within the area of the trans argument, but other people disagree with me. I mean, GB News regularly have a commentator on called Narinder Kaur, who repeatedly calls Asian MPs coconuts.
Yeah.
Now, she has not been suspended, and she has been allowed to come back on and still calls them coconuts, which is, people don't understand, it's a racist, I think it's a racist idea to describe someone with having brown skin, brown on the outside, white on the inside. So to me that is racist. But there was no hysteria around her comments. So there is already a kind of, well, hang on, why is this one person who's, you can disagree with what he said and say that you didn't like it, but I see lots of rude, sexist, racist things being said on GB News and on the BBC and on Channel 4. And we don't see this kind of reaction. So I think what happened was there was this strong reaction, probably because it's Laurence Fox and probably because people don't like him already. And then what happened was that GB News suspended him quite quickly. Now I guess it's debatable whether that was a good decision or not. I mean, I think that GB News are trying very hard to be seen as professional and to be seen to be doing the right thing. But I think what happens is by suspending him, they don't appease the people that criticise them. Whatever they do, people will go for them. And I think that by suspending Laurence Fox, what happened is it sort of legitimised this idea that he is definitely a misogynist and what he said was definitely wrong and cannot be allowed, which I think you can debate that actually. Like I said, I think I've heard worse things said on that show that have been allowed with no criticism. So there is room for debate here. And then since what's happened is it's almost like a snowball effect, which is kind of a tale of our age, isn't it? That it becomes Dan Watton, who has been suspended because he apparently didn't respond in the right way, or he was smiling or laughing, and then other people. So Calvin Robinson has been since suspended.
Calvin for sort of sticking up for Dan Wootton,
supporting them, and then it's become, and then what the conversation has become on Newsnight and the BBC is that the whole of GB News should be shut down. So this is an extreme kind of catastrophisation of one person, which it seems to me GB News were very vigilant with, that they suspended him immediately, which you don't see on the BBC and Channel 4 when people say what I consider to be very inappropriate things. And even though they did that, there was still this call for the whole of the news network to be shut down, which, as a, you know, with the BBC, recent things that have come out about Russell Brand and various other people at the BBC that have been involved in all sorts of scandals, we don't see a call for it, the whole thing to be shut down. And that's the issue, that this something so small can be used to try and trash the whole thing.
I think for me that, I don't know about you, but that is actually the nub of it, that in fact the mists around this rather silly, stupid thing, for which actually Laurence actually has said, yes, it was stupid, right? But they seem to basically the mist part really quite quickly into another issue. And it was about, as you say, trying to get this thing shut down.
That's the most disturbing thing of all, to see the speed with which and the relish with which people on Newsnight and, you know, mainstream respectable programs are calling to shut down media with which they don't agree. Now, when anybody on the right suggests that the BBC licence fee should be taken away, suddenly people are tarred as being Philistines and loathing of proper journalism and so forth. GB News performs a vitally important function. We have to remember it is the voice of the people in a world which, until the creation of GB News, was the voice of the elites. BBC, ITV, Channel 4 all parrot a certain particular view. It's an urbanite, metropolitan, Westminster bubble view, and we know, of course, from every polling result that's taken them by surprise, that the public have a completely different viewpoint on so many issues, and has provided a much needed service in allowing people to realise that they aren't alone, that their voices aren't in the wilderness, and they're seeing expressed on television for the first time really important discussions about issues facing them in their daily lives. And it's almost acted in a way, I think, like a bit like a valve on a pressure cooker, helping to ease off some of that steam, knowing that there is actually somewhere where those voices are being talked about. And so it is hugely important. And of course there are so many tangential things here. You know, the furore around Laurence Fox's, you know, crude and crass remark, I would say, is vastly less important than what actually he was railing against, which was this female journalist who was being so dismissive of the issue of male suicide, which is the leading killer of young men in this country, if I'm not mistaken. And this was a discussion on BBC Politics Live, in which both she and the head of the TUC, the trade union, another woman, could not countenance giving 1 or 2 minutes for the discussion of this, rather than say, oh, well, actually the female issues are far more important, and not to have the BBC issue an apology or a clarification, or not for what's her name, Coburn, the host of that, never took up that lady on that point. Now everybody's attacking Dan Wootton for not having challenged Laurence Fox. Why did nobody challenge this woman during her discussion on the BBC? And why is there no furore around that? I think the whole thing is deeply unfortunate. Now GB News is in a very difficult position because it's under employment law contracts, so it has to actually abide by the law. That's why you're seeing this long process being involved in investigating. But the other thing is, of course, each one of the people, well, Dan Wootton and Calvin Robinson have in their tweets, they've also attacked GB News executives, and I think that's made their positions untenable. If they had actually, there's nothing wrong with Calvin Robinson going in defence of Dan Wootton, of course, but once you start to attack the executives, you can understand why GB News was painted into a corner where they had to take the action that they did. But the problem with that is, whilst you may logically understand it, it of course goes to the image. The image of GB News takes a hit because of that, and people think that it's not a defender of free speech. And I think the viewing public, of course, understandably love Calvin, and they love Laurence, and they love Dan Wootton, and it just seems as if now they're being forced to take sides on this issue. And I think we'll only find out when we see the viewing figures for the months ahead, but I think it's going to be very telling to see how this plays out.
Do you think actually people do desert a channel for that reason? You know, like they think that they're not standing up for free speech. Let's face it, when we're talking free speech broadly here, you know, I mean broadly, to me it's not actually a free speech issue really. It's much more aligned to the famous Brand and Jonathan Ross incident on the BBC when they called Andrew Sachs up about his granddaughter, really nasty. In fact, it's far more nastier than this, in fact. No one called for the BBC to be shut down, and also they were seen as being kind of quite laddish, weren't they, for doing it, you know?
It's almost like Laurence Fox has been scapegoated for that reason, that we've just had this big dispatches about Russell Brand, and you can see loads of footage. His whole career was based on sexual innuendo and making comments about women, and Channel 4 and BBC, apart from that one Andrew Sachs thing where they did do something, but he continued to be platformed, and he wrote for The Guardian, and he was loved by the liberal media. And I actually, on the lead up to Laurence's comments, I heard a lot of female commentators commenting about how vile and disgusting Russell Brand is, and that they wouldn't have slept with him, and all of this sort of stuff. And then it's like Laurence says this one comment, and it's almost like 10 years of Russell Brand gets pushed onto him.
Yes.
Like we'll just make him the scapegoat for all of these things that we've allowed for so many years.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like to me. I wonder if the whole Russell Brand fiasco hadn't happened, would people have been so alert to the sort of thing that Laurence was saying? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting actually, because just today in Switzerland, a journalist has been sent to prison for 60 days, for 2 months, because he called another journalist a fat lesbian. Now,
in
what's
print or
on a Facebook video from 2 years ago? So this is very retroactive. From 2 years ago, this has emerged now. It's not just us that are falling foul of all of this stuff. I mean, most people in the world, have had things that were said, which of course would make them now fall foul of so-called hate speech. So yes, I think you're actually right. I think that the sensitivity of everybody post-Brand has made this more likely. But I wouldn't say that it wouldn't have happened anyway, because the things are so febrile at the moment.
There's one other kind of quite, practical business aspect to this, and that is that obviously everyone knows GB News has struggled with advertising, and so this is really not going to help that, is it? I mean, they must be sort of thinking of that, because there were sort of little suggestions here and there that in fact advertising was maybe getting a bit better. Certainly the viewing figures have been excellent. That's not the problem. The problem is how can it pay for itself? So if you have this sort of thing happening, they might have been thinking of that, maybe.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I wonder if as it's got bigger and it's more successful, and its viewing figures are now often better than BBC and Sky News, which I think a lot of people have been surprised by, that people weren't expecting it to be this successful this quickly. I think what's potentially happened is that at the beginning it could take risks, and it had nothing to lose, whereas now it's built up its brand. I think it's almost a bit risk averse now. It wants to keep that momentum going, and I wonder if the producers and the executives are more on alert to things that could potentially stop advertisement or stop, hinder the viewing figures from it growing. So, in terms of the future of GB News, I do wonder if it's, there is a risk that it will become more establishment as it gets bigger.
Yes.
That's the...
Well, that's true. I mean, I love GB News as it currently is, because it does, and it also, unlike, say, Talk TV, which is very sort of American-looking and slick, there's something very British about GB News. It's got that sort of it's more of a family feel there. But you're quite right. It's done so well, and I'm so proud of how it's now actually beating Sky News in all the major time slots. Is beating BBC News quite often in prime time as well. But of course, the reason that it's not getting advertising is because there's a boycott of it. We have to explain that. There's a group called Hope Not Hate, which is leading this boycott against it. Despite that, advertising is now beginning to get through, because of course advertisers realize eyeballs are more important than a group called Hope Not Hate. And it is making inroads there, and so I think that must be one of the judgments that the executives are making there. And you're seeing now they've brought on Camilla Tominey to lead their Sunday politics show, which actually now beats Sky News' politics show. They've got Christopher Hope, a great coup. They've got him from the Telegraph. Michael Portillo. They've got very, very heavy, serious, important figures now hosting their daytime slots, whereas the evening slot is still much more that sort of hell for leather, whatever you want to do goes on in the evening. And that dichotomy, I think, is actually a good example of where they're trying to decide how do we go forward now. We have the daytime quality professional programming. In the evening, it's much more the sort of cafe pub talk.
Well, which way do you think they should go?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think there is. I think they've done it pretty well so far. I mean, apart from this research, I think there's room for both of those things. But I think what people know GB News for is the pub talk, that it being something different, that it's not sterile, that you do get lots of different views and conflicts, and the daytime stuff is good, but it's not too different from the mainstream, and people do the clips that people watch and that gets lots of views is that kind of evening, the headliners, the comedy, the back and forth, the more the things that are more people having conflict or arguments. I think that's what people get that they don't get elsewhere. But it's got to be careful, hasn't it? I mean, if it wants that to grow, it's got to be mindful of who it asks on and the Ofcom rules and regulations. But also, it doesn't want to lose that, as you say, that kind of authenticity.
I suppose in a way you could say it's a difference between being a broadcaster and a YouTube channel. A lot of these things that people can do on YouTube, they just can't.
Well, that's one of the big debates they're having now at the moment. They chose, and the CEO will say this often, that we chose to be regulated because we wanted to be on televisions, and that does play an important role. But of course, with that, you have to actually be much more mindful of content. Now, we're a YouTube channel too, but we're also, I would say, we would pass all of Ofcom's tests just out of the common decency of how we portray things. But that is a route that GB News could go down. I can understand why they'll be reluctant to do so because of the fact that people, my uncle, for example, loves GB News. He's 96. He's not going to go online to watch this streaming. He can just about find it on his television. And I think there'll be a huge demographic of GB News who similarly aren't really comfortable with the online streaming world and are much happier with a television stream. So I think that probably is one of the factors that has prevented them from making that leap to streaming only.
How do you actually watch GB News when you watch it actually?
Yeah, I usually see it on Twitter or social media.
Just Twitter?
I have watched it, but mostly because I don't watch TV that much, so I do see it on social media.
I don't have a TV, so I tend to watch the clips.
I watched it on YouTube on my computer,
but never live. I very rarely watch it live.
Yes, I think it's interesting. When it first came up at GB News, we did a program all about what we thought of it. This is 2 years ago now, I think.
In the first week, I think we did.
First week, and they watched it. I then found out, and were very interested in what we were saying. I think that first of all, it's an achievement that they're still here, actually, because people had it in for them. What struck me about this occasion was, within a day, there was this discussion on Newsnight, which we all know about, with Adam Bolton and also Caroline Noakes, who's Tory MP, and David Yelland from The Sun, and they were all saying it should be shut down. I mean, were you like me? I was astonished at the blatant nature of this. They weren't just simply saying, this is terrible, but what else can we expect from these people? It was shut it down.
See, I think it's so important, coming back to the idea of it being a YouTube channel or a broadcasting channel, is that it bridges the gap between those two things. And that's so important because it does feel like the mainstream media and the world of YouTube are getting more and more separate, and there's echo chambers and they're not communicating. And GB News did a really good job of bridging that, and that it was bringing on some of the views that you would see on YouTube, but doing it in a through broadcast media. And it was so awful to see the way it was being discussed on Newsnight. I think Adam Bolton said it disturbs the delicate balance of the broadcast ecology.
Delicate ecology,
yeah. Delicate ecology. Well, if it's so delicate and it's so fragile, then maybe it's because it's a bit hypocritical and a bit corrupt. That's why it's so fragile, because any criticism of it, is of worth, because there are major issues with the mainstream media, and that's why it can't allow in something different. That's a problem with the mainstream media. That's not it's not a problem with GB News. And
the derision with which Angelo, the CEO, was treated on the Today programme. I don't know whether you heard the interview he did.
This is the chief exec
on BBC.
Angelo
the chief executive, interviewed by Amal Rajan in such a patronising, arrogant, condescending way, sneering, we're the real media, and now we're holding you to account. And then I've never heard of it before, but Nick Robinson, the co-host of the show, joined in on this interview. Now, interviews are always one-on-one on the Today programme, and for the first time I can remember, he came in as well to get his jibes in, almost desperate to have a go at GB News. That's the feeling that you got. It definitely is the legacy media trying to bring down a challenger, and I think that they're also very worried about the effect that it's having on viewing figures. Yes. We know that the Today programme is hemorrhaging viewing numbers. Nick Robinson said, "Oh, it's because people that don't want to watch the news anymore." No, they do. They don't want to watch your version of the news,
exactly.
And they can't face up to that fact. And getting rid of GB News is one way to try to restore the things in their favour.
I think they've lost the Today programme. Radio 4 lost about 1 million views in the past year or something. But GB News apparently had the best party at the Tory party conference, which has been this week. I mean, everyone was saying it was a fantastic party. I'm not sure whether it was the one where Nigel Farage and Priti Patel were singing together on karaoke or whatever. Everyone up there seemed to be having a kind of great time in Manchester. As we're recording this, actually, Rishi Sunak has made his speech this morning. What's your overall impression of it, Rafe?
Well, I have to say that this conference and the decision to get rid of HS2, for example, just to me symbolise everything that's wrong about the Tory party of the last 13 years. It's another sense of betrayal of the British public in much the same way that they never delivered on immigration. The people in the Red Wall voted to get levelling up done. The people weren't just voting for Brexit in 2019, they were voting also because they realised that having voted Labour for decades, there had been so little investment in their constituencies because the Tory party weren't channeling funds there. So they gave their vote in part because the Tory party promised to level up. And rather than level up, they spent all of their money on a link between Birmingham and London, which affected none of those constituencies, an expense that's gone way over budget. Why? Because of Tory shires insisting on tunnelling under fields and so forth.
It's only above ground for 9 minutes or something.
And that's why the expense of our infrastructure rail routes are something like 5 times higher than what they are in France and Germany, because we insist on tunnelling everything, which is grossly more expensive. That's why it's gone over budget. And of course now the final leg is not being done. I mean, they should have started at the top. They should have started by linking Leeds and Manchester and Birmingham and Newcastle and Crewe all together, because you really do have a Victorian system still up there today. I don't think people are aware in the south just how bad transport links are in the north. And but it's such a stupid decision to make, because when it comes to election time, people will vote based upon the fact, has my life improved? And if they have brand new train services in their part of the country, if they can see an improvement to the bus system, if they can see tangible evidence that the Tories have done something good, they'll be far more likely to cast their vote. Now, when all of the benefits of that money are underground tunnels in the south of England, there's no incentive to vote. So that made me very disappointed to see, and it reinforces yet another Tory betrayal. How can you believe them on any of their manifesto pledges, be it immigration or be it levelling up?
You see, I think for me, I mean, I always was anti-HS2 anyway. I mean, campaigned against it at one point. I remember during the mayoralty in 2016 or whatever, we were taken to various places that were going to be pretty decimated by this thing. But it was always a very kind of global elite project. It's not unlike the famous garden bridge across the Thames. Yes, we remember that. Did you support HS2? Does it? I'm not even sure most people even care so much about it.
I don't have strong feelings about it. I mean, I guess it seemed to me to lack vision in that it's as you said, it kind of there's a globalist feel about it, but also, I mean, how important I mean, more and more people are using Zoom now, and how important is it to travel from London to Manchester or Birmingham to Manchester, and wouldn't it be better to have more regional infrastructure rather than I don't know, it seemed curious to me that so much was put into this one rail line. And I think that Rishi makes the fact that he's not going to do that kind of the main part of his speech at the conference seems very uninspiring. That you would use the conference to say, this thing we were going to do, we're not going to do. And it's particularly in Manchester that you would announce that. When I know a lot of people that had difficulty getting there by train because of the train strikes, and were a bit peeved off by the time they got there because they travelled by car, and then they were hearing this announcement that there isn't going to be this train line, and I think it's just quite demoralising, because I think it shows more broadly that as a country we just lack the economic power to do large-scale infrastructure projects well and correctly and do them quickly in the way that you see with other countries.
But is it money, or is it actually just lack of will and kind of you need confidence to do these kind of things, don't you?
Yeah, well, I think we have the confidence, not the competence, if I can put it like that. Yeah. So much, and so much of what we do now, as I said, is we are needlessly wasting money that other countries don't do. 5 times or whatever the number is more expensive here than on the continent. And we'll just look at China. We haven't built a third runway on Heathrow Airport, but in the years we had that discussion, there've been 50 or 100 new airports built in China. Now they have no planning permission at all there, granted. But one of the reasons that Rishi's making these decisions is because we've now apparently brought Dominic Cummings back in secretly.
Oh, really?
So Dominic Cummings is now secretly advising the Prime Minister on how he can differentiate himself from his predecessors. And at this late stage in the game, what Dominic Cummings has said is you need to have major earth-shattering decisions that can really, in people's minds, draw a distinction between you. That's why we're seeing the cancellation of HS2 and these big decisions are being made. Yet the problem is these are big negative decisions. This is not something new, a new idea. This is scuttling an old idea. And Rishi Sunak's biggest popularity came when he actually announced the furlough scheme. That was a positive thing that he was doing. And I think that's what's missing now. It's a big gamble, this, because yes, people will be upset on both sides of the issue about this, and I think it behooves Sunak to actually make some positive, dramatic decisions as well.
I think it's I would agree with that. Just one thing on this HS2. It is the case, isn't it, that there's this ridiculous situation in this country where you have to do these kind of V-shaped journeys, that it's actually easier still to come down to London, go back. Actually ridiculous. Why should it be the case that we are left with essentially a kind of deluxe London to Birmingham train? I mean, that's what we're left with.
It's like the worst of both worlds, isn't it?
Well, exactly. But I would say one of the reasons is that essentially there's this kind of, we can't cancel the whole thing now because too much money's been spent.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And I mean, what is it? How much has been spent? I remember when we were campaigning on this, they were saying, it's going to cost something like 50 billion. And that basically that means 100 billion. I mean, it's over 100 billion now, isn't it? And the fees that go into these consultations, somehow, I think, was it 70? I was reading in the Telegraph, something like thousands of pages long, to go into the actual kind of consultation.
Well, the chap responsible for the very first stages of HS1 said that what you don't do is you never announce the budget, because once you announce the budget, that's when contractors and consultants start to increase their fees. If they don't know what the budget is, they'll lowball their quotes into you, and that was one of the major failings. But it's such a basic, obvious thing, right? This is ridiculous. But look, you and I went to Birmingham last week for a Birmingham Locals event. There's a train that takes an hour and 15 minutes to get there, right? That's every hour you can get there in an hour and 15 minutes. That is perfectly decent amount of time. We don't need another train journey that knocks off 15 minutes of an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah. Instead of that, so much could have been done. And it looks like now it'll be probably 30, 40, 50 years minimum before the North can get the transport service that they deserve. I think it's a complete scandal.
I think we just simply need a system, in a rail system in the North that goes from particularly east to west. This is the big thing. It's just ridiculously difficult to get across the country. So much for the Northern powerhouse, eh? I mean, on a broader note, what did you make of the whole, as it looked, the state of the Tory party, through this conference? I mean, was it sort of something that people should even look at and take seriously, or what? What do you think?
I think, I mean, we've said it before on this show, but with the Tories, it is very much like one step forward, two steps back. So, I mean, you know, they made some announcements that I agreed with in terms, especially with Steve Barclay and you know, the not allowing transgender women in
is that actually
wards. Well, he said he's going to ban it. Yes, right. But then I'm reminded of it. It wasn't only a couple of weeks ago that I was reading that there's going to be 200 or over 200 new diversity and inclusion roles in the NHS, and that Steve Barclay had written to try to prevent this, but it was still going ahead, and there was going to be 3 new organisations set up in the NHS for diversity. So it all seems a bit contradictory, really, and you also wonder whether these things will be enforced, because it's all very well standing up and saying we're going to ban this.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, they've said some, there's some positives that have come out of it, but like, I think most people feel like we've heard a lot of this before, and that they're being very tough on immigration and tough on woke, but we have heard these things before, and at this point it is just rhetoric.
Actually, that was one of the criticisms of Suella Braverman's speech. That actually it was quite tough. I mean, this is going out. While this is going out, actually we're going to be holding a conference on immigration. Excellent timing, I think you'd agree. What struck me about Suella Braverman was that it was probably the toughest in terms of pure rhetoric that I've heard from a Home Secretary, but actually did she say anything about what they would do? It was just, we must do this, we must do that. Well,
it was a speech designed to set a certain tone,
yes,
and to send a message to Tory voters and to potential Tory voters, and everything in there I agreed with. It was all the sort of stuff that we've been saying on this channel for years. But what's happened, of course, is that this speech, which everyone is now attacking from the left, and even from the left of the Tory party, all approved by the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister will never use the same words. It was a deliberately designed way to manipulate voters. So Suella Braverman has been outlined as the voice in the cabinet who will give voice to those views that nobody else is brave enough to do. That way people can say, well, the Tory party is airing those views, but you'll never hear the Prime Minister say that. You'll never hear anyone else in the cabinet say that. All that we're seeing in this conference is what happens before every election with the Tory party. They make all of these pledges. As Amy was saying, in 2010 and 2015 we heard, and 17, they were going to reduce immigration to the tens of thousands. What's happened is now 1.2 million gross migration that we're having now. Nobody can believe any of this. They talk tough to get tabloid headlines and to get sound bites, but nothing ever happens when they actually get into power.
Actually, there was that was gross, right? 1.2, but there was a recent headline this week saying that in fact we should expect 1 million net over 2 years.
Yes, which is I've never heard anyone describe things over 2 years.
Yes, exactly.
I didn't know why they were doing that. Anyway, it works well to alert people to how big this issue is.
It's a massive thing. When you sort of look at the way in which the Tories hold or in fact the other parties hold their conferences now, what strikes you, strikes me anyway, is that the people missing are the public, and certainly members. Members. It used to be, I went to lots of conferences in the 1980s, even in the late 70s actually. Big halls full of thousands of people actually. They've become woke fests, haven't they? Have you been to one recently? Have you ever? No. Well, the big parties, the big receptions are held by think tanks or I don't know what, or corporations. And what happens in the hall is sort of like nothing, But it used to be far more, and in a way that is symbolic, isn't it, of what's happened politically?
Yeah, it's been captured by organisations rather than giving people the voice.
One more thing, someone who really did, if you were watching GB News, really did feature at the conference this year was Nigel Farage. And I tell you, only a few years ago, they absolutely wouldn't have given him house room. He's gone up there for a different reason now. He's a journalist and everything, but he's got a very good perception. And apparently, Sunak said he would welcome. We are a broad church, right? He'd welcome in Nigel Farage. If Nigel Farage were leading the Tory party, would you vote for the Tory party, Amy?
Yes, I would. Yeah.
If he were leading it by some kind of fluke, stranger things have happened.
Yeah, he could do. If he does run, I think he's got a good chance. I don't think It'd be interesting to see what happens. I mean, what the people are commenting on after this conference was that the lack of identity, that it's, as you say, it's a broad church, but it's too broad in that nobody knows what it stands
Brains
for.
have fallen out.
Yes, whereas if, Farage would sort of galvanise, people would go one way or the other with Farage, and it would gain some sense of identity if Farage was in it and leading it. And I guess the people would have to decide whether they want to stay with that or not.
You think it's got to be a good ticket?
Yeah, I think it's a very good politician.
But Farage has given short shrift to the argument. He's dismissed it outright and said
he would being frivolous.
But I think the reason he's being mobbed by people and everyone wants a selfie is because he's actually speaking true conservatism. He's the only true conservative person of note or who's famous at the conference there. I can tell you one thing though: I would love him to be leader of the Conservative Party because he would finally turn it into a proper Conservative Party. But it would mean, I think, in many ways that we would lose any chance of an election victory, because only a more moderate or slightly centre-right, a centre-right to slightly beyond that, has a chance of capturing the votes to the left of the Tory party that's required. And Farage, much as we all love him, is too divisive a figure to actually guarantee the Tory party any hope of having a majority.
Okay, well, on that note, forget about Farage for a minute. Let's talk about kind of like the usual riders and runners and whatever. Who do you think, even if you care, who do you think would be there instead of Rishi Sunak?
Would or should?
Should actually, because they are basically all, aren't they, vying in some ways when they do their speeches?
I don't know Kevin Badenoch well enough to actually say that she would be the best person for the job. I think she needs to be tested a bit more, but she certainly is a person I think is more aligned with our views than anybody else that's there. Suella Braverman, I love everything that she says. I just don't know how much skill and commitment is there behind the scenes. The problem I have is with actually the Tory party members, because they were the ones who voted for Liz Truss, who was obviously going to be a disaster, who wasn't a true conservative, is a Republican liberal, and is a sort of neo-liberal rather than a proper conservative. And they love Penny Mordaunt, who's as woke as you can get. And the problem is the Tory party members don't really have enough knowledge, it seems to me, about the candidates. They like simply the superficial photo shoots that Liz Truss was doing, riding in a tank like Thatcher, and they all love Penny Mordaunt because she carried a sword at the coronation. Well, that's very nice, but that doesn't make you a prime minister.
Wearing a great dress.
And it's just all image over substance, unfortunately.
I like Suella and Kemi. I mean, I just don't know whether they've got the experience, to take on that role. But I like the things that both of them say. I was hearing that Liz Truss was getting a lot of support at the conference, which is quite surprising. I mean, I know she did get the vote to be the leader, but I would have thought, given all what happened, that people would have backtracked from her a bit. But actually, people were still very keen on Liz Truss, which is surprising.
Well, not only people, in fact, Nigel has written a piece in the Telegraph saying, "I agree with her 100%."
Even though she's pro-immigration, she wants to increase it. I can't understand that.
Yeah,
that's more of a liberal view.
She wants to liberalise immigration. Just we're talking about leaders and everything. What strikes me, you say about the superficialities, is that when you do see Tory party members being interviewed on TV, GB News or otherwise, you feel that they don't quite get the seriousness of the situation. I don't mean for the Tory party, but for the sort of things we talk about on this channel. They were queuing around the block for Theresa May's autobiography. Did you see? She was signing copies. The only people in the universe who possibly could be interested in what she has to say about anything. But when you see them being interviewed, it's like they haven't quite. They still talk about woke nonsense and politically correct nonsense and things like this. It just is. You sort of feel you are not fit for the purpose that we now need. Actually, I would say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's the same with the conference. As you said, it's changed. It now feels a lot more about networking and progressing your career. That's why you go to the conference rather than anything deeper. When you see them all having a good time. I'm not against that, but you feel like, hang on, there's some really serious things that need to be thought about. And,
Exactly.
you know.
And what you're saying about the Tory party members applies also to ministers and to MPs, because, you know, after Suella gave her speech, which was a good speech, so John Hayes came out and said it was a wonderful speech, hit all the right notes. But then you had Robert Buckland, you know, the former Lord Chancellor, saying that this was a speech unworthy of any Tory minister or MP, and that it was divisive. And I thought, wake up! She's actually the first person to call it as it is, and you still want to put your head in the ground and pretend that the world is all hunky-dory.
Yes, exactly. No, all of which means that to basically keep your feet on the ground and keep completely tuned in, you have to watch this channel, and where we actually are talking about these things that, you know, really concern you day in, day out. They certainly concern us. Thank you very, very much, Amy. Thanks, Rafe. And well, we'll be back next week, and we shall see you then. And have a good week in the meantime. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.